And we have breaking news for your wallet regarding inflation and interest rates. Stats Canada has released the latest inflation data for the month of April. Scott Peterson from our business unit is back. And Scott, economists are expecting that inflation was going to cool down. So walk us through what's actually happened.
Yeah, this is all by design. The Bank of Canada, the reason why we have high interest rates in the first place is to cool the economy, to cool inflation. And this is exactly what we're seeing this morning with the report from Statistics Canada. 2.7% is our new official inflation rate in the country, and that's down from 2.9 the month before. And this is, again, by design and a welcome relief to a lot of probably homeowners and anyone with high debt levels out there. But the 2.7%, when you dig into that numbers, we have numbers are still rising, but they're cooling. For example, food inflation over this time last year up 2.3%, and that number is a number that continues to come down. That was double digits, just a bunch of months ago. We also have shelter costs, 6.4% is the increase. That too is cooling, but when you look at rent prices up over 8%, mortgage interest costs up over 24% for everyone having to refinance at a higher mortgage rate. Those things still hurt, but everything else pretty much was softening as far as prices year over year. Household operations, furniture, clothing, all those prices fell over this time last year. Transportation still a sticky point. That's up about 3% on higher gas costs. Gas for April was up 6.1%. And we also saw health, personal care, recreation, those items all going down. And Bank of Canada looks for a trend, and we're seeing a bit of a trend here with prices indeed softening. So good news in the sense that this takes some pressure off the Bank of Canada to talk about rising interest rates, and also good news for people out there having to rearrange a mortgage or with high debt levels, that the prospect is the Bank of Canada might in fact lower rates based on this report that's with softer and cooling inflation.
Okay, so let's talk about that a bit more, because we are waiting next month to hear from the Bank of Canada.
Yes.
And possibly lower interest rates.
Yes, so June 5th, and Tiff Macklem has signaled that he wants to see a bit of a trend first. You know, the prices are coming down, that this isn't just a blip. So this is the last big data point that the Bank of Canada is going to be looking at before that June the 5th decision. But I was looking at market makers, and a statistic as far as only 47% of market makers thought we were going to see a rate reduction as far as June 5th. And that number now has jumped to 60% now of market analysts believe that we're going to see a rate drop from the Bank of Canada. So some real enthusiasm with these numbers as far as taking a lot of pressure off the Bank of Canada.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tasha.
And to discuss it even further, let's bring in Dominic Lapointe. He's the Director of Macro Strategy at Manulife Investment Management, and he's joining us from Montreal. Dominic, thank you so much for making time for us.
Good morning.
Let's begin with what Stats Canada has announced. Again, a reminder to folks, inflation rate fell to 2.7%. That is a 3-year low. What does that mean to you when you hear that number?
Yeah, I think we need to take a step back here and look at the progress that has been made in 2024. Inflation was way above 3% in late 2023. It isn't really falling at all. We've had concern about how it's going to fall, if anything. And we've made significant progress. As you said, we're now back at 2.7%. If you exclude shelter costs, such as rent and mortgage interest costs, inflation is below 1% right now. So really, many categories of goods, the prices are not increasing as fast. And I think it's a good news overall. We're slowly starting to see some relief for consumer for many items that they buy and services they consume.
Let's talk about that a bit more, because regardless of where the rates go, there are some things that Canadians just have to buy. They have to pay for. They have to pay for their rent. They have to pay for their mortgage. They have to buy food. And the costs of that are still so astronomically high for so many Canadians. How do you feel the Bank of Canada is going to be reflecting on all of that as we watch for what they're going to say in June?
So it's important to stress that when we say that inflation is lower, it doesn't mean that prices are falling, right? So prices are falling for some items, like if you want to buy a used car right now, maybe prices are a bit cheaper. If you want to buy some furniture, some clothing, it's a bit cheaper too. But in general, prices are still increasing. So it's not really, if you go buy items, you're not seeing the relief right now. But what it means is that compared to a year ago, for instance, they're not raising prices as fast as they did and not as frequently as they did. The Bank of Canada told us last April when they announced their last decision that they would need more evidence that this progress on inflation was taking place. And we've had a report for March, and this morning we've had a report for April that was even better than March if you compare how slowly prices are increasing. So to us, it does suggest that we have an economy that's pretty slow. The unemployment rate is slowly rising, and inflation is falling, which means that they could actually go ahead and lower their interest rate at the next decision on June 5th.
Let's talk about the economy as a whole, because for someone like you or someone who works at the Bank of Canada, these numbers here and there make a lot of sense. But for the average Canadian, it's about the whole state of the economy. And for them, the economy is not working. So much of what they need to have a good standard of living is out of reach. Where are we going? Are we heading in the right direction as far as that is concerned?
Not sure we're heading in what we would say the right direction. I think that the economy overall is barely holding on. So we're slowly starting to see the impact of higher interest rates. And we see businesses are saying, we're not going to hire as much. And now we're seeing the effects, for instance, on students with very high unemployment rate. It's going to be harder to find a job this summer, unfortunately. We have many newcomers in this country that used to be able to find a job quickly, and now they don't, right? So that's why if you look at the aggregate, things are not really bad in the sense that we don't see massive layoffs. We don't see a massive increase in the unemployment rate. But if we leave interest rates, for instance, at these rates for the whole of this year, trying to tame back, for instance, rent inflation that doesn't really depend on what the Bank of Canada does, and we'll have more pain and we'll have maybe more unemployment than the Bank of Canada wishes. And that's why, if you look at it from the whole perspective, we can say we need to give a little bit of relief on the rate side.
It's like you read my mind, Dominic. You brought up the very groups of people that I was thinking about, I wanted to ask you about, which is young people just graduating, huge student debts, can't afford to buy a home. Some can't afford to rent a place to live. And then for the first time, at least in my life, I've heard more and more of people who are newcomers to Canada, who came here to become citizens, and they've decided to leave. They say they thought they were going to live the Canadian dream, and it's just too expensive, and they're not getting the financial security they had hoped for. So are these things that are taken into account when banks are making their decisions, specifically the Bank of Canada?
Well, they are, but I must stress, the Bank of Canada doesn't control all of the issues you've mentioned. So for instance, rents, both for students or for newcomers that are usually going to rent before wanting to buy a home, right? We have a housing shortage in this country. The federal government is trying to build more, but it's going to be a decade-long process, if not more, to try to make supply and demand for homes in this country more in balance. You raise interest rate or you lower interest rate, unfortunately, it's not going to have a large impact on the affordability of home in this country. Might be a bit cheaper to get a mortgage, but if that also increases a lot demand, might be counterintuitive, right? And then you take another example, food prices. Well, we have climate change. We have forest fires right now in the West that could affect food prices in Canada. We have issues in the Middle East that could impact gas prices, right? So unfortunately for the Bank of Canada, there are a lot of issues right now that they're not necessarily under their control. And what they can actually focus on is more about domestic consumption, what you can buy, taking a loan about, right? Car prices, credit card prices. And those things that like the demand for those loans have come down quite a bit in recent years.
Okay, Dominic Lapointe, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.